everyone, welcome to the Bot Retort. We're going to do something a little different today. I know it's usually just me going, hi, how are you, here are my thoughts, but we're going in another direction. I want to talk about Venezuela. There's so much to get into. There are so many aspects of this story. Was Trump right? What does it mean for the future of Venezuela? What does it mean for the future of America first? So much to get into. So I want to bring in someone who really knows what they're talking about. Francis Foster is the co-host of the wildly successful and excellent podcast, Triggernometry. He's also spent a fair bit of his life living in Venezuela, so I'm really keen to get his insights on all of this. He joins me now. Francis, thank you so much for taking the time. I just want to first off ask, what were your initial reactions when you hear the news that Maduro is gone?
Well, to be honest with you, it's one of incredible disbelief. And the reason is you've got to look at it like this. Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999 in a democratic election, which he won fair and square and by a landslide, with a leftist populist message, which was the old elites are corrupt, which they were. You can't trust the politicians, which you couldn't. I'm the future. I'm going to redistribute wealth. And to a huge swathe of the population that were trapped in poverty, despite the fact that Venezuela should be one of the richest nations on earth, that was an incredibly appealing message. Fast forward to 2013, where the country had been driven into poverty, widespread corruption meant that the vast majority of the money from the petroleum got funneled into the pockets of Chavez and his cronies. And bear in mind that the Venezuelan economy was at that point 97% dependent on petroleum. So the reality is the rest of the economy was minimal in comparison. The vast majority of that money was going to Chavez and his cronies, and the people were left to starve. At that point, Chavez was dying of stomach cancer in 2013, and he appointed his successor, Nicolas Maduro, who you can see on the screen. Now, that was very surprising for Venezuelans at the time, because Nicolas Maduro wasn't the most talented of politicians. He wasn't the smartest, he wasn't the sharpest, he wasn't the most politically astute. But what Nicolas Maduro was at the time was he was a loyalist. He could be trusted to enact Chavez's instructions to the letter. And Maduro came to power in 2013. And at that point, there was a slight wave of optimism in Venezuela because they were thinking to themselves, things couldn't get worse. But unfortunately, they did. And as Maduro went on in his reign, so things got progressively worse and worse and worse for Venezuelan people. Now, some of you might be aware that it wasn't just Maduro that was taken by the US government, it was his wife. And his wife is a very interesting figure because his wife is the lady who many people in Venezuela credit with being the brains behind the operation. The Telegraph called her the Lady Macbeth of Venezuela. His wife was a politician before she married Nicolas Maduro. And you can see them online on Venezuelan TikTok. There are clips of Nicolas Maduro trying to do very, very, very basic mental mathematics in his speeches or in his direct addresses to the Venezuelan people and getting it wrong. Maduro has never been known for his intelligence, his competence, or his political ability. He was known as somebody who was a loyalist. And many people credit his wife as the real brains behind the operation. And in Venezuela, she is known as being even more extreme, even more authoritarian, and even more cruel than her husband. So I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was saying, Francis, I never thought this day could happen, that Nicolas Maduro would be facing justice. But to Venezuelan people, it's almost, if not more sweet, that she is facing justice with him.
Yeah, you mentioned he's not a natural politician, and yet he can't do simple mathematics, breaks a lot of promises, and has people around him to tell him what to do. He sounds like a natural one to me. But where do we go? Where are we now? So Maduro's gone, Lady Macbeth is gone. Who is likely to be in charge? I know it's so hard to say when there's so many updates coming, but who's likely to be in charge, say, 6 months from now and then maybe 2 years from now?
Well, the simple answer, James, is that we simply don't know. Those are questions which cannot be answered. All we can deal with are the facts that we know as of this moment, which is Delcy Rodriguez is currently in power. She is liaising with Trump. Trump is effectively calling the shots. Venezuela has now become a de facto colony of the United States of America. That is what is happening. And Delcy Rodriguez is a very interesting character. Now, for those people who think she might be more moderate, this isn't a moderate in any shape or form. This was a woman who was sitting at Maduro's right hand whilst he was being the authoritarian, whilst he was committing atrocities, whilst he was throwing his political opponents in jail and torturing them. And she stood by. She's also the daughter of a very prominent, very famous left-wing terrorist. So this is a woman who has the spirit of communism coursing through her veins. This isn't a left of center or even a left-wing Democrat. This is a hardline communist authoritarian. And I was talking to one of my friends who was saying to me that the images that you might have seen across all over your social media of Venezuelans celebrating, of Venezuelans dancing, playing music, playing musical instruments, that came from the streets of Madrid, Miami, New York, wherever it may be. Those did not come from the streets of Venezuela. When Venezuelans awoke on that Saturday morning, the streets were deserted. The only people who were out were people who were in a medical emergency, or they had to go to work, or they needed to go to the supermarket or to buy gas. That was literally it. No other Venezuelans were out. And if you were out, you was instructed that you had to carry your papers or documentation with you. And woe betide if you didn't have it with you, because that could be an immediate prison sentence. So this idea that this is a new dawn for Venezuela, it might be, but for a lot of Venezuelans, it's almost business as usual. But with the caveat that what you're also dealing with is the potential for a power vacuum. And there is one thing more dangerous in society than an authoritarian government, and that's a power vacuum, because that's when society can crumble, civilizations collapse, it can descend into civil war. And what Delcy Rodriguez and the rest of her cronies are doing is going really hard line to ensure that that doesn't happen. There have even been reports of the colectivos, and the colectivos are essentially Maduro's henchmen, they're his thugs, who are going around door to door, knocking on doors and checking to see if anybody has been promoting or posting pro-Trump social media. Also bearing in mind that X is currently banned in Venezuela. So, like I said before, there is a ray of hope for Venezuelans and Venezuela and the country itself, but it is only a ray of hope. And nothing is certain, nothing is written in stone, and these events can change day by day, hour to hour. And all Venezuelans can really do at this point is just sit tight and hope and pray that things stabilize and they can return to some kind of normalcy or normality.
Right. So here's the thing. So I get Venezuelans were happy to see Maduro go, and there's the fear that the people that come in afterwards, there's not going to be a whole lot of difference there. So then I go moving over to Trump. Why would he do this? I know, personally hated Maduro, the drug situation, the guy's simply dancing too much, he's not taking me seriously. I get why Trump doesn't like Maduro, but then why launch such a risky venture in Venezuela if there is no reason to change, and he does have a base behind him that's thinking America first, we're sick of interventionism, we're sick of getting involved in foreign politics. What was in it for Trump?
It's a great question. So there are three aspects to this. There's the drug aspect, which, as we all know, is pretty much a red herring. The reality is that Venezuela doesn't produce drugs by and large. The cocaine in South America is largely produced by Colombia, Brazil, sorry, not Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia. It is then taken to Venezuela. Venezuela is known as El Puente. Puente in Spanish means bridge. And from there, it's then transported to America. The reason it's taken to Venezuela is because Venezuela is the closest in proximity to the United States and Florida in particular. So that's number one, but that's not really the main issue. There's two other issues in particular. Number two, it's the fact that Nicolas Maduro has been allied with some of America's enemies: China, Russia, Iran. And not only is he allied with them, China receives 4% of its oil from Venezuela, which is still a significant amount. It's a significant amount. And also as well, you have to think that because of its allies with Iran, Venezuela, the reports coming out of Venezuela, and there have been for a long time, that they have Hezbollah training camps. So terrorists who go and attack America's allies are being literally trained in Venezuela. They are literally being trained on America's back door. And you have the Russians involved. This to the United States of America and Trump in particular is an untenable situation. On Triggernometry, we've been discussing this for the last 2 years and saying this can't possibly continue. When Chavez came to power, he was allied with the Cubans, in particular, the Cuban leader at the time, Fidel Castro. And they had a relationship, which was a beautiful relationship as far as each country was concerned. Chavez provided Cuba with cheap oil, which helped to keep the Cuban economy afloat because Cuba's always 24 hours away from going broke. So that helped to keep Fidel in power. It helped to keep the economy afloat. And what Fidel gave Chavez was the know-how and the intelligence and also the troops to turn Venezuela from a democracy into a fully fledged authoritarian communist regime. So that's the second part. You have a man who is allied with your enemies, and is not only allied with your enemies, he also is providing them with oil. He is also allowing terrorist groups who attack your allies to be trained on Venezuelan soil, literally a couple of hours flight away from America. And there's also the third part of this, which is Nicolas Maduro himself. Because we all know that Americans don't mind a dictatorship as long as they play ball. And one thing Venezuelan dictators have never done is play ball. Chavez, when he described, who was, by the way, a fierce critic of the United States, famously described George W. Bush as being as dangerous as a monkey with a razor blade, openly mocking. When Maduro came to power in 2013, he was following the exact same narrative as his former boss. But he actually upped the ante. Guyana is a country which is next to Venezuela. Guyana is a former British colony. And there has been a region of Guyana that has always been contested. The Venezuelans say it belongs to them. The Guyanese say it belongs to them. And this has been an argument since time immemorial, but it was essentially a piece of impenetrable rainforest. Nobody really cared. Until in 2015, when they discovered huge deposits of oil there. At this point, Maduro began saber rattling, and he started saying, "This belongs to us." He redrew the map of Venezuela to include this region. He then distributed it to every single school child in Venezuela. So every single school child in the schools of that country was brought up thinking that territory belonged to Venezuela. And not only that, he then had an election where he asked the Venezuelan people, should we invade and should that territory belong to us? And in his words, I think it was around 92% of Venezuelans agreed, despite the fact that at this point, our immigrant population was around 8 million, and Venezuelans couldn't even afford to eat. It was clearly ridiculous. But what you've just seen is that not only do you have a leader fraternizing with your enemies, not only do you have a leader participating in the drug trade, but possibly even worse than that, you have a leader who is openly contemptuous, openly antagonistic, and openly mocking you. And for a leader as thin-skinned and as impulsive as Donald Trump, this was untenable.
Yeah, I kind of feel that the playing ball part for me is the key thing here. I think what Trump has done has gone to not just anyone that comes after Maduro, but also in other countries, like you mentioned, where the drugs come from, Colombia. He's also talked about Cuba. I think dictators, they don't talk soft policy, they don't talk economic deals, but they do talk, hey, if you are mean to me in the dead of night, I'm coming for you. And now there's proof of concept on that. It does happen, and it could happen again. And, we're speaking in pure conjecture here, but there is a possibility that the vice president who has taken over from Maduro was kind of in on it in the lead up, might have even been providing Trump with some information. I wonder if that person also knows where the bread is buttered now. But I want to talk about America first, right? Because Trump is getting criticism from his base that, it's the strike on Iran. What happened to the idea that the world is just, why would we care about what's happening in Venezuela? Why would we care about what's happening in Iran and Israel when there's poverty at home? What happened to America first? And I think America first kind of gets a bit, we've got it wrong in the sense that America First isn't itself an isolationist policy. America First is more, how does America benefit the most in any particular decision? So if it is striking Iran, it's not a matter of we're getting involved in intervention. It's that America will be better than it was 24 hours ago if we do this. Same thing with Maduro gone. So is this in itself an America First policy? Is America better off now that Maduro's out of there?
Well, you've got to think about it. Look, America first, like all of these policies, James, means different things to different people. If you perceive America first to be an aggressively isolationist policy, which is we do not want to get involved with anything that is going on in the world. We do not want to get involved in the Middle East. We certainly don't want to get involved in Venezuela. This is nothing to do with us. We want to prioritize our people, our country. Then you would say that this contravenes America first. If America first to you means that you prioritize what is good for America in inverted commas, and what is good for America can mean different things to different people, then perhaps it is. Because you've got to think of it like this. Trump says that they are now going to run Venezuela for the foreseeable. They are now going to get the oil pumping again. They are now going to ensure that trillions of dollars will now be siphoned off to America, or billions of dollars will now be siphoned off to America. That will help the American economy. That will help American companies. That will help the stock market. Is that not America first? Because really all they had to do was one relatively, although highly skillful operation, and they've got rid of Maduro, and now they've got access to all of these resources. Whilst not forgetting as well that people always talk about the oil in Venezuela, and so they should, largest oil reserves in the world. But it's not just the oil. It's the fact that we've got gold. It's the fact that we've got natural gas reserves, and we've got huge deposits of natural minerals. All of these things can be mined, and they are all highly lucrative industries, particularly for the oil companies. Trump has actually said himself that he had a meeting with the execs of all the big oil companies in order to start going into Venezuela and start exploiting the oil. So like all of these things, James, it depends how you look at it. But I'm going to be telling you quite honestly, I don't think Delcy Rodriguez, the current president of Venezuela, is going to be messing around with Donald Trump, because she saw what happened to her boss. She saw what happened to her boss and her boss's wife. And Trump has been very, very clear and direct with her. If you try any type of shenanigans with me, this same thing is going to happen to you. So she is under no illusions when it comes to that. In fact, there is a rumor, and I need to make this absolutely clear. This is conjecture. This is a rumor. But there is a rumor in Venezuela that she was in on this because all of the top dogs in Maduro's cabinet all had bounties on their head placed there by the American government, apart from Delcy Rodriguez and her brother, who was head of the Senate. Now, why is that? Why are they the only two people who didn't have that? So the rumors are that she was in on it from the start, which is why she was ushered into power, and not Corina Machado, who is rightly seen by many Venezuelans as the de facto leader of the country. In fact, Trump has actually said that she is a nice lady, but she doesn't have the respect of the country. And what many people interpret that by that is that she doesn't have the respect of the military. So to go back to America first, if you think America first means absolutely no intervention, we focus on our country and our country alone, then this is a complete abandonment of your policy and your election pledges. If you think America first means doing what's right by America, including the economics of it, then actually maybe this is America first.
Okay, I want to get back into the Trump criticism in a bit, but let's just jump ahead slightly here to talk about regime change. So America's got a pretty checkered history with regime change. There's three ways they tend to go about it. There's the hidden and quitted approach, which we're already kind of seeing Trump talk about. I mean, he's kind of talking about the attack on Maduro in the past tense. He's kind of moved on. I know there's always the threat that he might come back for the new president, but we'll see. But the hidden and quitted approach, that was used in Libya. They got Gaddafi, they got out of there. But then the power vacuum, which you raised before, I mean, in many ways, Libya's now worse off. So that's one approach that's possible. The second approach that's possible is we're here until it's all figured out. Trump's also raised this as a possibility, this idea that we're going to be controlling the oil until it's all figured out. Who knows what figured out means? I mean, we went into Afghanistan and Iraq because we were going to be there until democracy was figured out, and then that was a disaster as well. And then there's the third option, which is we're going to get the guy we don't like, we're going to install him with someone we do, and then the country's just going to figure it out. South Americans know this well, obviously. This was the approach they had with Pinochet, and then Pinochet turns out to be horrible as well. So what are you hoping that America's approach is going to end up being as someone with a deep affinity for Venezuela? And then what do you think Trump's approach is going to be as someone that's responsible to US taxpayers?
I think the reality is that none of us know what's going to happen. That I think we have to be honest about that and go at this point, none of us know. I think Delcy Rodriguez is going to be in charge for 90 days. So she has a 90-day interim period. And I think the reason why they didn't remove the entire government is because it would have destabilized the country too much. And there was a potential to go for it to descend into chaos. If you look at what the Americans did and what we did and its allies did in Iraq or in Afghanistan, they had this kind of rather idealistic, it was incredibly idealistic idea that we were going to bring democracy. We were going to bring democracy and Western liberal values to countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, and others, which is, to put it bluntly, demented. It's a completely different culture. These countries are essentially arbitrary lines on a map where different warring tribes are essentially permanently engaged in conflict with one another along racial and also religious grounds. Venezuela is slightly different to that. So people comparing Venezuela to those countries, for me, it's a lazy comparison. Venezuela has had democracy. Our last dictatorship ended in the mid-60s. Ever since then, we've had a democracy. Now, admittedly, it's a highly corrupt democracy. You can argue whether democracy actually worked for the country, but it was a form of democracy nevertheless. If you remember, Chavez was democratically elected. Now, we've had a dictatorship for the best part of 27 years, but that doesn't mean that we can't go back to a democracy. But if I'm being honest with you, I don't think Trump or his cronies particularly care about that. I don't think they care about having a government that cares about Venezuelan people. I don't think they particularly care that they have a government who looks after its people and cares for them. I think what they care about most of all is that there is a government in place in Venezuela that is on board and on side with the Americans and lets them get the oil and extract it and sell it and is a good business partner. I don't think they particularly care about regime change, if I'm being brutally honest.
Yeah, because that is, going back to Trump criticism, that is the one from the left. We've seen the protests anti what's happened here coming from, obviously, people that have never been to Venezuela, but people saying that this is just a naked oil grab, hands off the Venezuelan people. You're saying they might have somewhat of a point? I think, look, it's definitely about oil. It's about resources. It's about the fact that you had, like I said before, a dictator who wasn't playing ball. Trump, at his core, is a pragmatist. I wouldn't say he's ideological in the way that the Republican Party used to be, who are avowedly neoconservative. I think he's far more pragmatic than that. What I think he wants is a Venezuela that is not going to be a threat to America, that's going to play ball, and that is going to allow its oil and its resources to be mined and is going to be able to conduct business. America has never had a problem with dealing and working with despotic regimes, evil dictators, as long as they operate and work within American interests. I just think that's the simple reality of it. There's a large part of me that would love for a better government to come in and, govern properly and give Venezuelan people hope and dignity back. I really do. As we stand now, I'm not sure how realistic that is. There is one criticism that I'm actually quite partial to, which is the idea that Trump just bypassed Congress. So this was defended by the Trump and Rubio as going, it's not an act of war. This is, it's basically a criminal case. We went in, we got the guy that the Justice Department wanted, and we got out of there. We didn't declare war. I can't get on board with that. I think if Australia came and just kidnapped Keir Starmer, I think you personally might be helping our troops find where he is. But I think as a country...
You're welcome to him, mate.
Yeah. You'd be like, it's that room there. No, the one on the left. But I think that, once he'd come down from the adrenaline rush of finally getting rid of Keir Starmer, you would have to acknowledge that on some level, Australia and the UK would be at war. We stole your leader. I mean, if Venezuela went in and stole Trump, game on. I just think this is something that the US Congress should have been notified about. This is something that everyone needs to be on the same page on. How do you feel about that?
Look, as somebody who is half Venezuelan and has South American heritage and understands a little bit of the history of the region, America has been involved in regime change for longer than both of us have been around. They have been involved in regime changes since how can I put this, for the last 100 or so years. So the reality is this is a very American play. Should they have gone through Congress? Yeah, they should have done, quite possibly. But the reality is that that's never how America has behaved. That's never how America has behaved to Latin America in particular, which is one of the criticisms that Latin America has always leveled at the United States, which is we are your playthings. You impose governments in us, dictatorships in us, which are cruel, brutal, and barbaric, but you don't care as long as they act within your interests. That's always been the way. So the fact that this has happened is only surprising if you don't know history. That's the reason that there was communist revolutions, because there was always a feeling in these countries that they were getting a raw deal and they weren't in charge. They weren't the masters of their own destiny, shall we just say. So I understand why you say that they should have followed protocol, but the reality is, historically, is this has always been the relationship between the Americans and the Latin Americans.
Let's start wrapping things up. So Venezuela, if you look at it without any context of history, there'd be no reason for this country to have high rates of poverty and be poor. I mean, you think about the climate, you think about the natural resources, it's got neighbors, it's got ocean that is close to America. There is absolutely no reason for this to be as poor as it is, and yet here we are because of bad leadership for over decades. But you do need the muscle memory. You say that Venezuela was a democracy up until the 60s. You do need a muscle memory of how things are supposed to be in a free market and democratic system, or you are going to slide back into strongman. I mean, 1991, Russia, Cold War ends, but Russia, you know, they don't really know what it is to have a democracy. They don't know what it is like. So obviously they just fall back on muscle memory of strongmen run the countries. What are the odds that, you know, 30, 40 years from now, Venezuela's kind of like an Argentina, kind of like any other nation in that it's functional, things are happening. If you are impoverished, the government look after you. If you do want to run your own business, the government's not going to be meddling, and there is a functioning capitalist democratic system.
Well, so to inject a ray of hope, I was watching a lecture by this economist, and he was saying, Venezuela is so rich. It is so rich in natural resources that it's like a salvavidas, which they call it in Venezuela, which is a life jacket. Whatever you do to a life jacket, it will always float. It doesn't matter the conditions. It doesn't matter what's happening around it, how rough the sea is. It will always float. That's Venezuela. The only way you can keep a life jacket underwater is if you physically hold it there and you use your body weight and your strength to keep it down. And that's what the government have been doing in Venezuela. They have been physically keeping it underwater and preventing it from flourishing, because it's only by doing that can they keep on enriching themselves, can they keep on maintaining their power over the country. So I'm hopeful because I believe you always have to have hope. That's the only way to live in life. I think the only way to actually operate and to move through is to go, look, Venezuela has the potential to be one of the richest countries in the world. It's facing desperate times. It's currently with a government that is corrupt, authoritarian, communist, evil. But if something can happen, and stranger things have happened before, and we actually get a government in that works for the people and wants to do its best by the Venezuelan people, this country can be transformed like no other. It's so rich. The potential is just stunning. And I think that is what every Venezuelan person wants. The word hope in Spanish is esperanza. And the first part of that word is espera, which means to wait. And myself, my family, Venezuelans, we've been waiting for a long time. And what we have now is a little ray of hope. And hopefully, we will see better days for the country. But I think at the moment, it's just that one solitary ray, and we'll see what happens. And maybe America will be like, well, as long as the government is acting within our interests, then that's good enough for us. Or maybe Trump behaves with some type of integrity and installs a leader or helps to bring about a leader that has Venezuela's best interests at heart. We can only wait and we can only hope, James.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to hope, we have to watch the news and just, hope for a better future for the country. Francis Foster, Triggernometry podcast. It's one of my favorites. Everyone should be listening to it if they're not already. I imagine they are, just from how big your view counts are. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate that conversation.
Thanks, James. Pleasure, mate.